It's June 2nd, and this is the evening edition of Mike and Bike. It's ancient Greece time today. I'm going to talk about the Peloponnesian War. My memory's a little rusty since I haven't read the books on the Peloponnesian War in a couple years, but it's always a subject that fascinates me, and I figure it's good for a good topic to think about on my way home today. One of the fascinating things, maybe the most fascinating thing about the Peloponnesian War is all of the, it's certainly people do draw similarities and comparisons with the modern world from the Peloponnesian War, but I think more broadly, the Peloponnesian War is a great example of the timelessness of history and how things that happened even long ago are relevant today. Or another way to put it is that history just repeats itself. A cynic could look at that and say, humans never learn from their mistakes. And I suppose I agree with that. Human nature hasn't really changed in tens of thousands of years, if longer. So why should history change? History could change, I suppose, if humans lived forever, but we don't. So each generation is pretty much tabula rasa, starting with nothing. You can certainly read some of the histories of things that happened before, but it's not going to really teach you much. You have to live through life to learn, live things. And just reading some historical accounts of things that happened aren't going to be enough to prevent you from running into some of the same problems. And I think too that it's not that the problems can be different, but the same. Do you bike year round?
Unfortunately for shopping, but yeah.
Yeah, I bike pretty much all year, yeah. Just on a few occasions where I have to drive because I have some appointment or someplace I have to get to during the day.
Well, it's really good. It's just, I don't know. I feel it's too hot in the summer.
Yeah, well, yeah, I agree. I prefer the winter, frankly, to the heat.
As long as it's not snowing.
Yeah,
it's not actually
ice isn't so fun. That I'll grant you.
You just need like metal tires so you can skate. Perfect.
So human nature doesn't change. And I do think that history, we can learn from history so we don't repeat the exact same mistake, but we often back into the same problems through different routes. Because people are emotional creatures, and they're going to respond to some things in similar ways. So I think that even if you know of a specific thing in history, I mean, like Hitler knew that a two-front war for Germany was a bad idea, but he wound up in one anyway. So as much as people try to avoid some things that history even shows are things to be avoided, you can wind up facing the same thing, because if you've got the same goals as some previous generations, you're going to wind up in the same problems no matter what. And humans, by and large, do have the same ambitions as that we've always had. So back to the Peloponnesian War. I know it was very popular in during the Cold War to use the Peloponnesian War as an example of, they would look at that and say, oh, well, the Spartans were the Russians and the Athenians was NATO. More recently, in the 2000s, I think you can draw some very good comparisons to American foreign policy and its futility and things that happened in the Peloponnesian War. I think one of the biggest things I take away from the war, which can actually be said of most wars, is that wars and conflicts take on momentum all of their own. And whatever the motives and ideas you had when you started the thing kind of become irrelevant later on. Both the Athenians and the Spartans had limited objectives for the war when it began. But as it dragged on and both sides suffered more and more, nothing but complete victory would suffice. And each side kept doubling down and going in for more and more, larger and larger attacks, and throwing out, rules of civilized warfare as existed at the time. I mean, it became, total war, win at all cost. Nothing matters, just win. And in the end, Greece was mortally wounded and left really in a position where it was relatively easy for foreign domination. In the form of Macedon and Alexander. But actually, even later, Greece really was fundamentally weakened in some structural senses, such that it wasn't able to withstand Rome and so on. And I mean, the Spartans won the war, but they did so at such terrible costs to themselves and to Greece even. And I don't blame the Spartans. The Athenians were doing terrible things trying to win too. I mean, to use the modern example of mutual assured destruction, I mean, both sides were lobbing nuclear missiles at each other. The Spartans, of all things, brought the Persians into the war. You know, the arch enemy of all Greece, the Spartans go and bring them in. And without the Spartans, they might not have won. The Spartans might not have won without the Persians, the Persian navy in particular, to pin down the Athenian navy. Both sides, the Spartans and the Athenians, threw all their principles out the window during the war. The Athenians, who revered democracy and freedom so much, wound up becoming tyrants over other Greek states. They couldn't allow other Greek states to leave the alliance or empire that Athens had formed. So anybody who raises a question about it gets placed under basically martial law, an invasion. You know, it's a very good question. What's the point of fighting a war if in doing so you become the evil that you're fighting against, and you justify doing terrible things to others and your own people as necessary expedients to win the war? America certainly has modern parallels to that. Yeah, America got into, you think of the Vietnamese War, you think of war in Iraq, in all these wars, even Afghanistan, you go into them, America goes in, you know, thinking this will be quick and easy. It turns out that it isn't. And you're stuck there for a long time. And then it becomes unclear what victory would even be like if you left. And what victory would really be. How could you have victory? And to achieve your victories, you compromise a lot of your principles on civil rights in your own nation, on how you treat the people you're attacking. The rules of civilized war go out the window. Nothing is new under the sun. The Greeks saw it all before. And frankly, I'm sure they weren't the first. There's been other wars long before the Peloponnesian War. The Peloponnesian War lasted a long time. And there was a break in between, something like 20 years or something. I'm getting mixed up now on the dates. I think the war was at least 50 years long. I'm thinking longer. It all started with an ally of Sparta that was squabbling with Athens. I think Athens had, or they were, this Spartan ally had been squabbling with its own, with a colony of its own. And that colony had asked Athens for help. Athens had sent help. And then this colony got really upset. I'm trying to remember, it was Argos. Goodness, I can't remember it. And so then they lobbied the Spartans to start a war. The Spartans didn't really want to. But in the end, they felt they had to defend their members, their fellow members of the Peloponnesian League. If they didn't, people would wonder what's the point of the league. So they went and challenged Athens. And Athens had actually been preparing for a conflict with Sparta quite a while. They built a great wall around their city that would pretty much nullify Spartan military power. No one had ways to destroy or to wage siege warfare and surmount fortifications then in those days. No good siege machinery. And since Athens had a great maritime fleet, they could keep themselves supplied from their remote colonies and allies indefinitely, even if the Spartans were to camp right outside the wall on the land. And this proved to be true. But by having the wall, Athens felt they didn't have to worry about Spartan sensibilities in doing things or foreign policy actions that might anger Sparta. which led them to become increasingly reckless in their foreign policy endeavors, which wound up bringing Sparta into a war. And sure enough, the great defense of their walls protected Athens as they had always planned. Spartans could do nothing. They could march all around the city of Athens and torch the farms in Greater Attica, which is the region where Athens sits. But they couldn't get at anybody in the city. So the Spartans would have to just march home in defeat. There was no point, frankly, in staying there because the Athenians could keep getting food from the sea, and the Spartans had no fleet to speak of to wage war on the ocean with Athens. It's really quite incredible, though, how much of an impact on history that this period of this brief period in Greek history has had on world history and even on Greek history. So many of the Greek names that have survived into the modern world come from this brief time frame on 100 or so years leading up to the war and during and after it. It's just amazing to me how many of the great Greek achievements and great Greek thinkers and politicians and writers lived during this time. It's quite phenomenal. This was truly a golden age for Greece. And they destroyed it in an unremitting war that went on and on. I think it's somewhat natural for people today reading about the Peloponnesian War to root for the Athenians. The Athenians were the Democrats. They were much more of a liberal mindset that we would recognize. The Spartans were weird. They had a subclass of slaves, the helots. All of the men served in the army for life, pretty much. Children, the young boys had to go live in army barracks, and it raised on something close to gruel. The whole Spartan culture just seems so strange and bizarre and barbaric, frankly. That said, I think we can sometimes give the Athenians too much credit. They certainly were not without blame in some of the provocations that led up to the war. And see there, even runners catch up to me on my bike while I was going up a hill. Now I'm going downhill. I think he won't be able to catch me so easily now. So the Athenians certainly are not blameless in causing the war and in the barbaric execution of the war. The Athenians threw out all the rules of civilized warfare, just like the Spartans. The Athenians became tyrants to their allies. So, a tyrant is a tyrant. Those bikes pass me like I'm just standing still. But I don't mind. I'm comfortable with my own pace and speed. The Peloponnesian War was pretty fun to play what if games with. What if Athens hadn't went to war in Italy, or Sicily, sorry, against Syracuse, which was nothing but a land grab for empire. You know, so many different what ifs you could play on that. But things turned out as they did. And I tend to be of the view that these things would ultimately, the same result would have wound up even if a given battle hadn't happened or a given strategy hadn't happened. Because the people had a certain mentality and the same instincts. They would have just picked a different battle or a different strategy to mess up on. And that draws us to the end of another episode of Mike and Bike. See you tomorrow.